Perfect. Hey everyone, how are you doing? Fantastic. We have a ton of people who've joined, and we're having some technical difficulties with Zoom, so I do apologize for the delayed start. The more advanced technology gets, the finickier the smaller tools get. So we are hopefully past it soon. We'll have Michael joining us within the next minute or so. And with that, we'll get started as soon as Michael is able to get here. Since everyone's already here, I'll do maybe a quick kind of recap for what we're going to go through today. We'll start with a quick round of introduction, just so everybody knows who you're talking to. And then we'll jump into Michael explaining a little bit more around his idea for motion world model, which is kind of a novel approach to world model building. And then once Michael presents it, we'll have a couple of experts. We'll do introductions shortly and a couple of experts explain what their thoughts are and kind of do a little bit of a fireside chat around how is the idea, where would it work, what are the potential challenges. So we'll get started in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Hello, sorry I'm late. Hi,
Hi.
Hey, how are you,
Anju.
Michael?
Hi,
Hi,
Michael.
Sorry about
Tristan.
that. All good and no worries at all. I was telling everyone that Zoom is a little finicky at times. But that being said, I think everybody is here and we obviously want to take advantage of all of the time that we have today to really pull out this idea for motion world models for you. I'm going to get started on a
Well, okay, is it just me who's kind of, is my screen frozen?
yes, a
Yes.
little bit.
Little bit, it's completely frozen from my side.
We can hear you perfectly though. It might hopefully
We
Okay, let me
buffers.
try to rejoin if that actually works.
Sure, Michael. And I will
Mhm,
pull up the slides while we're at it.
mhm. The examples we need to add somehow. Okay,
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep.
Perfect. And so we'll give Michael a second to do a quick reset for the Wi-Fi. This always happens when you're going live. Zoom works perfectly for random calls throughout the entire day, but when it matters the most. Let me actually promote Michael one more time. Excellent. I think Michael is back.
hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully this works better this time.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. So, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Tristan. I'll just honestly kick us off, but we have amazing people on the webinar and fire chat today who I think I will hand over control to, and I'm eager to hear what they have to say. The topic today is motion world models for robot control. And I do want to highlight our sponsor, Khosla Ventures. Thank you so much, Kanu, for bringing all of us together. They've invested in some of the best AI companies in the world, being the first venture capital into OpenAI. So if anybody in the audience is interested in learning more, feel free to visit their site, shoot me a note, or reach out to Kanu directly. My name is Tristan. I'm a partner at Rora. We work with talented PhDs and deep tech researchers to build a career of consequence. So if you want to go down that route, come talk to us. But in the interest of time, I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit and hand over to Kanu and Michael, who can get started on self-introduction.
Hey everyone, super excited to be here. Thanks, Tristan, for the kickoff. Um, we are joined here by a really esteemed group of roboticists, researchers. So very excited to introduce Michael. Real quick about myself, I'm a partner at Tosa Ventures, and I focus on applications that are leveraging advances in AI and more increasingly robotics. So I'm very excited to also learn from this very esteemed panel. Uh, Michael, do you want to just give us your background in your words?
Okay. I'm Michael Liu, working in computer vision as well as robot learning. I hold my tenure with Stony Brook University. I've been a researcher in various companies in the past, including Google Brain, Google DeepMind, as well as Salesforce. And I have worked on several initial robot foundation models, including RT1, RT2. And today I have some interesting kind of idea, paradigm, as well as observations I want to discuss with everybody, which is on world model and motion world model. And we'll dive deeper into this later.
Yeah, super excited. Um, let's start with introduction by uh, Jeannette and Angjoo. Jeannette, do you want to start us?
Sure, I get started. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeannette Bohg. I'm an associate professor of computer science at Stanford University, as it's just written here. And I've been working on robotic manipulation since almost 20 years at this point. It's kind of wild to say. And I started with robot learning for grasping, and since then have transitioned into much more complex manipulation problems. I'm interested in dexterous manipulation with multi-fingered hand. I'm interested in tactile perception. I'm interested in mobile manipulation as well. So, and I'm excited to hear today about what Michael has to pitch, and happy to discuss that concept.
Angjoo?
Great. Hi, I'm Angjoo Kanazawa. I'm an assistant professor at UC Berkeley. I did research at the intersection of computer vision, graphics, machine learning, and now robotics. I've worked a lot on 4D dynamic reconstruction of the world from videos. And more recently, we have been doing more research in robotics. And so I'm kind of curious to hear about Michael's ideas. Thanks.
Okay, Michael, maybe just get us started, like in one simple sentence, like explain what are world models and specifically what are motion world models. And maybe if you can also use a killer use case, like why are they valuable? So it gives our audience a good, grounding in it.
So let me share my view from a bit more computer vision researcher point of view. So world model is a transition model, state transition model, dynamics model. We can call this in many different fashions. But from a computer vision point of view, this is a future frame prediction model. The future, we are predicting RGB future frame while capturing all the dynamics, physics, and everything possible, making it the realistic representation of future. So that's what the world model is about. And I like world model in a sense that within the model, there has to be some form of visual reasoning in order to infer what is likely to happen in the future. And motion world model, which I'm trying to pitch today, is a kind of form of world model. I may even kind of claim that this is like a superset of world model. Because in addition to predicting the future frame, we also want to explicitly predict future motion, how things will be moving in the future, in addition to how things will appear in the future. And why am I so obsessed with like the motion representation? Again, it comes from my background back in computer vision, like video understanding, activity recognition days, where motion was really the crucial key to find out what's happening in the video. But also in the form, in terms of like robot control, motion is a very direct cue telling how things should be moving. And it sometimes, very often, is easier for the robot to infer its own action if it knows how things should be moving visually. So that's the reason why I'm bringing this concept here. I mean, motion world model in addition to world model. The arrows here, which I'm showing here, are just for the visualization. The actual kind of prediction of the motion is what you see on the bottom, which is kind of color encoded based on the orientation. It's not the optical flow computation. It's actually like, showing the future optical flow, how things should be moving in the future for something to happen. Condition on the input, like just one single image that is shown on the left, as you see here. What we are showing on the right is the actual frame that is we are generating, as similar to the world model. And in addition to that, we are explicitly predicting how things should be moving in the form of future optical flow.
And maybe just to complete that thought, just to give our audience a very succinct response on what is an example of a use case where, without world models, we will not be able to progress, but world models allow us to, move further ahead or realize that robotics application?
Yeah. The main motivation, obviously, is to make best use of such kind of motion information for the final control of the robot action, robot manipulation, mobility, or anything. We want to predict in the pixel space how things should be moving, and we ultimately want to map this into the robot control in the end. Why does this matter? Obviously, if we also have world model and then try to infer motion out of RGB frames the world model is generating, this thing still can, work in a sense that, we can apply some off-the-shelf algorithm to infer motion. However, that's indirect estimation of the motion compared to what we are doing here directly. I think in terms of the supervision we are providing, if we can directly supervise the model to focus the motion, that actually has a power in terms of like efficiency as well as the accuracy. And our observation constantly has been that directly predicting the motion allows us to more accurately and more fine-grainedly predict how things should be moving.
And what should we understand is the biggest current limitation? What can't be modeled or what can't today be solved using motion world models?
One of the biggest concern, obviously, will be the depth, which we are actually also trying to incorporate. So if we are just talking about 2D kind of pixel motion, it's completely lacking like 3D information. And that's the reason why we are actually trying to incorporate like pseudo depth or actual kind of 3D ground truth to make this motion not just 2D kind of future optical flow, but a 3D motion. And in addition to such 3D motion, one thing it kind of, is kind of limited is when things are occluded. If things are not visible, we don't know how things are moving. And that's the reason why we are actually trying to not just take an advantage of like image level forecasting, but more video level forecasting, so that we can have a smoother motion video, even if something goes, behind an object and reappears and so on.
And what data do we need to train these motion world models? Can you talk about the various approaches to it?
Videos. So the reason, there could be many different forms of motion representation. So the crux of motion world model is the fact that we are predicting visual motion out of a given input image. This visual motion representation actually could be anything. Here we are using future optical flow as one particular kind of motion representation, but could be anything. Simultaneously, the reason why we are using the future optical flow is that the future optical flow is actually very easy to obtain. As long as we have a complete video of the entire kind of robot trajectory, we can actually obtain optical flows and use it for the supervision. So, long story short, the necessity, what kind of data do we need in order to train motion world model is exactly identical to what we need for world model, just videos.
And how far into the future can our model predict before errors make the planning worse? And is it different for world models and motion world models?
This is an interesting question. It depends on like the horizon of the task, like how complicated the tasks are. But in our particular motion world model, what is most important is that we know how to move immediately. So we don't need to predict until the very end. As long as we can nicely infer for shorter kind of time horizon how things should be moving, then we can re-infer, after taking some actions. So in this particular case, it was not more than just 16 steps in the future. And that was sufficient to generate some smooth motion outputs.
And is the evaluation of the world models different than motion world models?
There are many ways to evaluate, but when we are talking about the robot kind of action policy, evaluating robot action policy, it can be evaluated in the same manner. How much kind of robot succeeds in certain tasks. In terms of the evaluation of the motion world model itself, it's a fair comparison to take advantage of how accurate the motion is. The ultimate desired output of motion world model is accurate motion. And by comparing this to the ground truth future optical flow, we can actually get the accuracy, and we can even compare it with an indirect way of how world model can be used to infer motion. And we have been obtaining pretty successful result because this is more direct supervision of how motion should be instead of having indirect motion estimation.
Do you have a sense of like how the distribution shift to new objects or new settings? Like how will that flow into the world models and motion world models? Like the kind of like different training and different test data.
This is an open question. This is a very good open question. Some people argue that as long as we have an infinite amount of data, we'll capture everything. Everything will be seen, and there is no new object. Under such scenario, yes, everything will be nice and easy. However, the data is always limited, and the objects are always new. And in such settings, it really depends on how much we can actually generalize. And in order to obtain something like this, we actually have been very heavily rely on the power of reason video diffusion models. And which was already pre-trained with lots of different objects, lots of different environments. So this particular thing, motion world model as well as the world model, will definitely depend on the quality of the advancement we are making in the video diffusion. And we want to take best out of it. We want to take as much things out of it.
Michael, are there other slides you want to absolutely cover? We should go through that. And then I want to invite Jeannette and Angjoo to also join the conversation with us.
And while I switch out slides, Michael, I think there was a question in the Q&A as well.
Sounds good.
Connor, if you want to help him with that, let me make sure we can get to the next slide.
Yeah, the question, Michael, is what sort of evaluations are used? Are there open benchmarks? And what time horizons can be predicted? So we talked about the time horizon, but let's understand, are there open benchmarks to better evaluate the world models, or specifically motion world models?
So if we are just talking about specifically evaluating the motion world, for world model, yes, there are standard kind of data sets, benchmarks, and so on. For the final kind of robot task evaluation, there are also standard tasks and everything. For this particular motion world model, obviously we are talking about the motion kind of future optical flow prediction, and there is much kind of limited set of evaluation and benchmarks. In some sense, we are lucky that we can kind of formulate this in the reasonable way we want. In some sense, yes, it has to be kind of discussed with the community how to best set the motion evaluation.
And there's one more question.
And also the question was also about what's the duration of the future prediction. This really depends on the quality of the video diffusion, as well as how much kind of computation we are willing to burn for the computation of the future frames.
And then how is the approach for training motion world models different, or the trajectory is different than training a world model?
Yep. So yes, let me actually try to get into this with the previous, the slide, the current style we are kind of looking at right now. So this particularly is about on one particular kind of example instantiation of motion world model. It's showing a very kind of generic architecture. So we are formulating this as a dual system approach. We see the green box over here as well as the kind of pink box on the right hand side. So we can view this as like high level and low level, or like system 2, system 1 formulation. So we are dumping all the inputs to the green one first. This green one is a high level component, which is kind of, as mentioned, one example instantiation of motion world model, trying to predict pixel motion. Given all these inputs, we predict how things should be moving. And condition on how things should be moving, this pink box, which sometimes is called system 1 or action expert, is responsible for mapping this to the actual motor control, the robot action. So the good thing about this particular formulation is not really end-to-end training anymore. We can use possible like pre-trained video diffusion as our green bounding box, and then try to fine-tune on top of it to make this predict motion, making it motion world model. And then try to train another expert to map this to the final motor control. So the training of these two things can be done separately or jointly, with a kind of inductive bias of forcing the intermediate representation of pixel motion in the middle, which is our discussion point, whether this is really desirable or not, with Angjoo and Jeannette. But the hunch here is that decompose the training, have strong intermediate representation as inductive bias in order to reduce the amount of training of the entire thing. As well as try to borrow from the visual reasoning capability of diffusion as much as possible by converting this into motion world model.
Jeannette, Angjoo, I would love for you to join the conversation. Maybe just to carry us forward, how is your definition of world models, and how Michael talks about them and the motion world models is different? What are you most excited about in terms of the latest in world models? Jeannette, maybe we start from you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to start. So, how would I define world models? Well, there are many different names for it, and I think the way Michael defined them, that also aligns with how I would define them. I would maybe be more explicit about action conditioning, which I'm not quite sure if you, Michael, if this is like part of your green box in this particular case. So that would be interesting to me.
Yes.
Yeah, is it part of it or not?
So yes, sorry that I kind of omitted, because when we talk about the world model, it has to be action condition. Without action condition, it's not world model. It's just a computer vision future frame
Right,
prediction
it's a
model.
video prediction
So
model.
yes, yeah. So it's kind of in this particular example case, like example architecture, it's like language kind of task conditioned.
Okay. So that's very interesting. I think I had the similar question that was also posed in the Q&A by this person called Pujit Kachana, and I'm very sorry for butchering your name, but I was also wondering, right? Like, it seems like the way you train this particular motion world model is like almost like as with another pre-training objective, that is that of predicting optical flow, basically, right? And I was also curious with what happens at scale, right? Like, you found it to be a useful, pre-training objective. And to be honest, I've used it in earlier work before, right? Like, predicting optical flow has also been useful in like work that we've done, like kind of different work from what you have done, but we've also used it and we found it to be very useful. But I'm curious, what do you think happens at scale? Do you still need that kind of pre-training objective in addition?
Yes. So, Jeannette, I think these are very good kind of points. So there are two aspects to this. First of all, we can view this as like additional kind of auxiliary kind of pre-training task, and by doing this, we actually benefit, making better world models. So by having this objective of predicting the motion, our RGB prediction becomes like slightly more reliable and better. Simultaneously, what I am really interested in is the use of this motion kind of representation itself.
Yeah.
So in addition to serving as a better kind of training objective, I actually want to take advantage of these motions being predicted directly for the final motor control. And we actually found that the motion representation actually is a strong cue, kind of telling the model what to do. So, the pink bounding box actually is a standalone model, even if we don't actually provide like future optical flow. We can actually provide just future frames or current frames or all the necessary information. But we kind of found that by providing explicit motion information, which is how things should be moving in the future, it was benefiting from this quite a bit in our experiments, which was a good observation to have actually. As mentioned, I'm a big advocate in the use of visual representation, motion representation, and so on. So it was a nice observation to kind of confirm.
Yeah. So I also think that this representation is very interesting, and you're framing it as, it provides very useful cues to this action expert in the end. The way I also think about it as being very useful is that it provides a representation of the visual input that is very much removed from the appearance of objects, right? Like, so it really compresses the information that is actually maybe in a pair of RGB images away from the details of the appearance of the environment, of the objects, and of actually the embodiment as well. And so that's why I think maybe it might be useful, right? Like, because it's just like a abstraction that gets rid of some details that are maybe not relevant.
Yeah. In that context, we actually, not in this particular paper, but in some of other follow-up works, we actually try training this motion world model or its variant using human data as well. Like, human wearable camera recording, like how humans are manipulating things with hand. And it actually did help quite a bit, which is kind of
that embodiment
confirming.
gap.
Yeah. So the hunch or the intuition is that this actually allows us to take advantage of different forms of embodiments much better, because they are all kind of unified as like pixel motion, abstracted. As you mentioned, like, so yeah, it's an interesting kind of, take for generalization as well, I think.
Yeah, I have more questions, but maybe Angjoo wants to come in.
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Angjoo. I'd love to hear from you how you think about world models and also their limitations today.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a hot take on world models, but before I go there, I do agree in the motion one. Actually, we've been trying to develop a work model like this for 3D for like almost a year now. Hopefully, we can make it to near IPS. But yeah, working in 3D I think is really nice, because then issues like, I think motions are inherently easier to learn in 3D because the projection makes them more nonlinear. And then there's also the occlusion issue, which is that you can actually kind of predict through it. But then the representation is an issue, and of course data is an issue. So that is a hard problem. I think there has been pretty cool papers like MoMAP or Point World that are actually going in this direction. But my take actually is that I think a lot of people like to talk about this world model, which is this action condition future prediction. And I push back that this is actually a world model. Well, it's like when people say world model, you mean as in, at least for me, that means like I want to develop an agent that can actually understand the model of the world from interaction or whatever data, so that it can do a lot of things that we can do. Then, physics simulation, physics engine, like, understanding what's going to happen if I push this. There's some dynamics and there is some future predictions, but I don't think that's all of the world modeling, actually. The really key is essential aspect of the world modeling is not just action condition future prediction, but the probability distribution over all the possible actions that can actually happen at the current state. And the marginalization of these two terms over the action is what's actually going to give you the state transition of one frame to the other frame, right? And this is actually precisely why I think LLMs and video models are really good because they're actually doing the final end representation. It's just that the internal representation of the disentanglement between like what possible actions and what's going to happen with that action is not as explicit, but it is learning the right thing. And I feel like just this pure focus on this world model, I think is a bit of I mean, it's great. I mean, I think it should be happening in either pixels 2D or 3D, but I think it just leaves out a lot of the pictures when you actually want to use this to do a lot of the things that we would like to do. So my pitch is really the world model is the composition of both the future and then also the distribution of the actions. And that space is actually what you would do the reasoning in. And the actions could be physical actions, but also could be language or any other type of latent representations.
Michael, do you want to respond, add?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the definition of the world model is a bit like blurry. Many people have been using the action condition state transition model, which is a perfect kind of technical like reinforcement learning terminology, as something to kind of represent world model. I think it also comes from the history. I mean, was it about like 10 years ago when David Ha kind of released the paper on, world model? It was following the exact same reinforcement learning formulation while replacing the model to be a neural network. And because of its kind of beginning, the things have been kind of dominated by this kind of action condition state transition. I mean, when people talk about world model, it was kind of being dominated by the research on action condition state transition model. And obviously, the action, we need to consider multiple different possible actions, the distribution of all these actions, the reasoning to infer how things will be based on all these possible actions and its distribution. If we can actually kind of more explicitly capture all these aspects into the modeling, that actually will be super nice. I think, that there should be some more research in world model with different action possibilities as well as the distribution of different action possibilities. Here I probably wanted to focus more on what do we really mean by what we are generating with the world model. So the output of the world model currently has been like the RGB appearances. Without much kind of more interpretation on top of it, or without more kind of objectives on top of it. As long as the RGB frames looked nice, everything was fine, setting aside everything that's happening below. And I wanted to bring one more objective into that the motion has to be accurate. And also that we wanted to focus this visual reasoning to care about the motion by doing this. So these are like some of the different aspects, and hopefully, multiple actions, distribution of the actions, reasoning with different action kind of distributions, all these actually, could be combined with explicit like motion inference as well. What do you think, Angjoo? Here we are adding motion as one more representation to the world model. Do you think this will help in any aspect in terms of like handling like action distributions and so on?
I mean, I think definitely modeling motion is kind of like a JEPA-like direction of like, I think Jeannette also said too, I believe in a more compressed latent representation. And I think in that sense, it's very useful. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Motion is good. I would say 3D would be better, but it's hard to do it.
Maybe for the audience, like maybe help us understand, like in what aspect will it be better? Will you be able to do more complicated trajectories? Will you be able to do longer horizon tasks? When you say better, like explain that a little bit more.
I think with the video models, you spend a lot of time trying to model making it really pretty. And it's unclear whether that photorealistic pixel reconstruction or prediction is is necessary for understanding low frequency details that the robots may want to understand. And so then it feels like you're spending a lot of effort into modeling that, even though that's where the data is, and that's not necessarily a bad supervision. It just seems very heavy and also expensive. And at the end of the day, I think with more data, video models are going to get better and better, but still, when it comes to interaction information or physics, it might be not as good.
Jeanette, is that something similar to what you believe?
Yeah, I think, it reminds me a bit of like maybe a discussion that is a bit far back, which is like graphics versus robotics, right? Like in graphics, sometimes people try to, I've never been in the graphics community, but I know Michael and Angjoo definitely have been in there, right? So they make it look really nice, but it doesn't mean that the motion behind it is actually physically feasible, right? Like for a robot, for example. So it reminds me a little bit of this. And maybe, but maybe to come back to, Angjoo's point and what Michael responded to, I think what you want from a world model really depends on how you want to use it, right? Like, so there's different ways on how people use world models. And some of them are doing explicit planning with it, right? And so that could be one way to do it. And another way is like in Dreamer V4, for example, right? Like to use the world model as like almost like a simulator in which you can play around and dream, right? Like and therefore train a policy in there. And there probably then maybe you do want to have nice visuals, right? So there you would want that. While in the planning situation, you probably don't want to explicitly plan in pixel space. That's way too high dimensional, right? Like, so there you do want to compress it. And so I'm curious, right? Like, so here in this particular work, Michael, you actually didn't use a latent space, right? Like,
I need to confess. I need to confess. So for the visualization, we are showing the nice fancy like motion
oh, I
images.
see. But you actually do use the latent space as input to the diffusion
Yes, I
policy.
mean like
Okay.
one or
You
two
don't
layers
go
below.
through that. Okay, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, I'm curious, like, Angjoo, like, because you made this point of like, oh, you have, right, like you want a world model for you really has all the possible actions plus the distribution of possible outcomes kind of as part of it. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you think world models, like, how would you use them, right? Like, what would be your dream of using world models, especially if they did have that information included in them?
Yeah, I think for one thing, even if you wanted to use it for NPC type directions, like if the action space is high, you definitely need this all possible state of actions for you to actually explicitly plan. That's one thing. But
But
I'm also yeah.
you could just sample the actions, right? Like, and
Yeah,
still.
but then there's also a manifold of reasonable actions to do. And
Mhm.
as I learn more and more about RL, I feel like that's where it seems not like how humans learn. Because as humans, as you do all of these experiences, you actually are learning these common sense ways of actually moving around. And that helps us explore better and learn faster. So to me, actually, I feel like this composition is necessary for learning more efficiently. But also it's necessary for reasoning. I think it's kind of more like how are you going to reason with video models? And actually, if you look at a lot of the ways people are doing it, it's basically you want to do the reasoning in something like a language space or some kind of a coherent space, and that's basically kind of this action space. And then the video models are a way to like play out what could happen so that you can think about it. And so in this sense, it's a very vision as inverse graphics way of thinking about this. It's like instead of directly predicting action, you're basically doing reason. How do you reason in pixels? Is that you actually have this very good render or a physics engine, and then you actually reason in this action space. And then that action space to sample arbitrarily is too much, and there's many structures in here. And so this is why you would kind of want to learn some kind of common sense, like common sense possible set of actions, which is exactly what kind of like LLMs are.
So is it fair to say that, if we understood the distribution over possible actions, we will be able to reason or generalize better, like for the out of distribution tasks also?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. What are if in terms of like data, if perfect 3D data were available, where would it help with just world model and our next set of motion prediction in that? Like, is 3D motion prediction data valuable?
Definitely. Definitely. So one thing we are actually trying with this motion world model, not in this particular work, example we are showing, but in our follow-up work is actually 3D rise our pixel motion representation. So, at least in the form of like RG, in the like, X, Y, and depth kind of flows. So these types of 3D naturally matters quite a bit for robot control because robot control, in most cases, are in 3D. The action space is mostly in 3D. So the 3D movement is definitely something we really desire. It's just that most of the videos publicly available with like human hand videos, robot videos, and so on are not, unfortunately, not in the form of 3D. They are mostly in form of 2D. And that's the reason why we are trying to do this with pseudo 3D, at least. And even that is kind of more beneficial than just completely ignoring 3D when we are supervising the world model or the motion world model. So, it's pretty obvious answer, and sorry to disappoint everybody for not initiating an argument, but yeah, 3D definitely is something that's we will really benefit from if we have.
Okay, we talked about like, out of distribution, we talked about occlusion, like all of those challenges. Let's talk a little bit more about manipulation and heavy contact. How should we model that? Where are world models, motion world models, limitations for heavy contact? And this is a question for all three of you.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
So, Jeannette, please go ahead. I have a kind of, a pretty strong opinion on this, but Jeannette, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely love to hear it. So yeah, I was actually also thinking about that, right? Like you mentioned, for example, Michael, like when it comes to occlusion and things like that, right? Like it's kind of hard to make the right predictions here. And maybe this helps more, right? Like actually having this additional pre-training objective. But yeah, I do think for not for all, but for like context-rich tasks, especially with objects that are heavily occluded, maybe, or with fragile objects, be it produce or even people, you probably want to have a robot with a sense of touch and to also be able to predict, what the maybe force magnitude should be you're actually applying to whatever object it is you're interacting with, right? And again, this doesn't matter all the time. It doesn't matter with clothes. It doesn't matter with just pick and place task or things like that. You can see most of what you need to see actually. But if you are heavily occluded, or if you want to be deliberate about how much force you apply without actually inducing a lot of visual change, then I think a robot definitely needs a sense of touch. And, there's no data out there that is helpful to that at all. But it's I do have to also admit that I'm pretty surprised of the kinds of tasks that can be done with VLAs at this point, where I previously thought like, oh, this is like really difficult to do without a sense of touch. But it also requires a lot of let's say creativity by the demonstrators to achieve these types of tasks without basically having the robot with a sense of touch.
Yeah, yes. And sorry to disappoint the audience once more. This was exactly the point I was trying to make. Look at this pixel motion image. It's in the form of like 2D movements. And if the resolution is low, or if kind of movements are very like subtle, then yeah, it's very difficult to describe things in the form of pixel motion. On the other hand, if we have like a additional kind of modalities, additional input modalities such as touch, tactile sensors, it's much easier to actually provide a signal for the low-level system how to move accurately. So what I am trying to say here is that we already talked about the use of the depth. And this example we are showing here is like a slight use of pseudo depth, as you can see from the gradation of some of the flow kind of images. But in addition to depth, tactile and other types of modalities should be kind of included. So the world model, motion world model, they all need to become multimodal models. And this definitely will benefit. I mean, although I'm from a computer vision community, vision information itself for fine-grained manipulation and so on are not really 100% sufficient, in my opinion.
Angjoo, do you have a take on contact and yeah?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I agree. I think it's about interaction. And I think this is why I'm doing a little bit more robotics these days, because there's a question about like why 3D learning would be better than video. I really go back and forth on this, and I have two bets on this because like on one hand, we should do prediction in 3D because it's a much more compressed space. And like Jeannette said, it removes you from the appearance and how things are moving. And I really think the benefit is, for example, the cross morphology is a really big thing. Like all actions are 3D, and so in that sense, it really unites things. Like forces are okay, aside from touch, motion gives forces, which kind of impacts things and how objects move, and all of those are 3D things. But then you really do want to learn from pixels. And so I'm actually kind of like in between, as I don't know whether it's a really good idea to reconstruct everything in 3D and then try to do that learning there. What I do know though, that's why I like to think about it in the way I thought about it, because if you're an agent, you're always actually doing this action, right? And so you're actually kind of improving upon your probability of action that you could do, condition or not condition on a task. And that's actually happening in 3D. And so it's kind of more like instead of 3D, action as a latent space that results in some pixels. And in that way, that is more generalizable because that's what the data is in.
Michael, Jeannette, any follow-up on 3D?
Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe you have read this as well, the blog post from Vincent Sitzman that came out recently. Like
Can you summarize it for everyone?
Okay, I'm trying poorly. Sorry, Vincent, if I summarize it poorly, but kind of the main take home that I took away is that he didn't think that 3D is going to be important and necessary. He does think that robotics is important and embodiment, to finally evaluate things not in this intermediate representation of 3D and how good you reconstruct it, but actually in terms of like, oh, what can the agent actually do, right? Like, and he doesn't think that this explicit 3D representation is actually necessary to have, right? Like it's just another representation that smart people came up with, but then if you scale, maybe it's not going to be necessary anymore, right? Like, and so I'm not sure. I mean, nobody knows. I mean, don't think anyone knows in this round or out there in the community, right? We are all just placing bets and are going for testing them. Yeah, so I'm also not sure. I always also thought like Angjoo, right? Like 3D must be important. Like we have two eyes, and especially when it comes to fast tasks with high dynamics, we really have to know where things are in 3D to be able to do them. But we can also get a lot out of monocular images, especially in relation to our arm, right? Like, so if we know how big our arm is, like literally, and it's in the image, we can probably make a lot of inference about the size of objects and their distances. And then, again, like lots of models, like not more world models, but VLAs or, diffusion policies and things like that. They all are based on using a wrist camera to actually see from that vantage point where the hand and the fingertips are relative to the objects. That gives so much useful information, right? Like in the old days, this was called visual surveying. Now it's kind of like learned. And so maybe that's why 3D is actually, not required so much right now, because there's so much implicit information already in the monocular images that give you a sense of absolute scale, actually, and distances between your fingertips and the objects, right? But so maybe I'm also a little bit back and forth, just like Angjoo. Yeah, so nobody knows the answer, and we're all just, poking around and seeing which hypothesis actually becomes true or not.
Yeah. And
No,
yes, yeah, and
I was
I'm
just
also
saying, I
making a
love
bet.
the spectrum of like on this panel alone is like, okay, how important is explicit 3D? And like, I like that you all have, varying views, and that's useful. Um,
Yep.
we are about to wrap up, Michael. I do want to hear from you, right? Like, let's going forward, what would you like to see
Mhm.
in all the research and, the next advancements happening in world modeling? What
Yep.
will what would you specifically, is there a proof point that you think about when you see like, yes, this is the right direction? Um,
So, as Janet mentioned, we are all making a bet. I'm also making a bet here. Previously, I was kind of heavily involved in some of the, vision language action model (VLA) efforts, uh,
mhm.
particularly building on top of like LLMs, VLMs, language reasoning based on language tokens, and so on. Yes, we learned a lot, and it's a very good approach to like infer high level actions. But here, I mean, many, not just me, many people are realizing that that's not everything. We need something more fine grained, something more detailed, to infer the robot actions. And that's the reason why I'm making a bet here on particularly on visual reasoning capability of these world models, motion world models, using diffusion. And I'm also making a bet that motion is a crucial intermediate representation we should all care about in the form of the supervision as well as in the form of actually using it. I mean, there was one question asking what's the inference pipeline. And I think what's most important here is that we do have this explicit, it can be latent, but explicit latent motion representation inside the pipeline. And that's the bet I am making. And we also talked about like the 3D and tactile, which
Mm.
is, I mean, which is a bet somebody has to make. And yes, I am slightly betting on 3D, not in the aspect of having like full 3D reconstruction with ground truth, but in a sense that we have some intermediate like pseudo 3D representation the model should care about. So incorporating that, making it multimodal definitely is one bet I will be making for motion world model, as well as the tactile images is definitely another modality I think should all care about. So, I mean, I'm essentially doing a summary of all the discussions we had,
Yeah.
multimodal world model. In the end, when will we know we are succeeding in this or not? I think there is no kind of a single point where we can nicely evaluate things. I mean, this is good or bad. Things will happen continuously and
Mm.
gradually. We'll be getting more and more observations as more people are betting into this direction. And obviously, the ultimate objective is to control the robot. So things should be evaluated with a robot control. Even if we can do the best like world model, make the best world model or motion world model, um, if we fail to convince that this is like not really useful for robot learning, robot action policy, then yeah, there will be other use cases and other people can explore this further. But the reason why I am into this is because we can take advantage of this for the robot control.
For
So
Jeannette and
yep.
sorry, Michael, go on.
No. So
Okay.
I mean, I was just going to say that's pretty much it from me.
I guess for Jeannette and Angjoo, I'm just going to spice it up a little bit. Like, if you had to give a very focused problem statement for a PhD student in this like world models, how would you frame that question that will really have an impact in this field? Okay, we can lighten it up. Make it for a master's student.
Well, I mean,
Actually, for a master's student, it has to be more focused because they have less time.
yeah.
While a PhD student can like really explore more, right? And so, yeah, I think, okay, here's one suggestion I would have. So if you train an action conditional world model, why not training a VLA in the first place, right? Like, what's the advantage of going imitation learning or more like this what is called model-based approach, right? Like where the model is learned actually. So it could be that, for example, that you can do actually actions that were not in a training data set, right? Like because in a world model, you learn more about transitions and the implicit physics and things like that, while in an imitation learning framework, you learn more about, you literally learn supervised, like, oh, I'm in this state, do this action, right? So so I would love someone to explicitly compare that. That is still a very open question. I don't know how focused that problem statement is.
That
Yeah.
is a very profound question of our times. Type yes.
Yeah,
Angjoo?
maybe I will end it, but it is kind of what I was saying. Instead of just world models, I really think we need to be thinking about how to make our algorithm learn in a more sample efficient way. And how you learn and use the world model is part of it. I think that's what I would say. In terms of leaving with something, I'm actually not super pro the way the Dreamer people think people are thinking about using Dreamer. It's not that you shouldn't be using world models to train on that simulation. It's just that, if you had the cheaper simulation about the world, but then still did PPO and then still had to do so many things in order to learn, then we're not really making a progress. And I feel like that's why I think we need to really think about sample
Yeah.
efficiency.
I agree with that, but the world doesn't agree with you. Us, maybe the world thinks now it's cheap to collect data. So yeah,
Well, yeah, well, now then I'm more with the BC than actually learn this video model and just do like thrush around in the video model,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair criticism, but we find some things exciting and we want to explore it with the tools we have today. And but these are great open questions for our audiences. So thank you, everyone. Tristan, is there any final words that you wanted to say?
No, honestly, I'm just humbled that we were able to kind of be a fly on the wall as we listen to the experts discuss some of these cutting edge tech. I think a reminder for everybody, all of the panelists, the socials are up here, so feel free to add them. Suggest questions. If Michael didn't answer all of your questions, feel free to add him and shoot slide into his DM, as the kids say. And then, as a side note, we're hosting another event in about 2 to 3 weeks with the founder of a self-driving car company, and his company was acquired by Waymo. And stay tuned because we're still figuring out the details. But outside of that, a heartfelt thank you to Michael, Kanu, Angjoo, and Jeannette for joining us on a Friday afternoon. And I'm excited and looking forward to the next session with that we get to hang out and do something similar again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.